Okay, this is the first video for 1302, especially intended for people I have not seen yet in person. Um, that's Sinton and King. I've at least checked in with all of the other campuses, but any of you are welcome to watch. Uh, there is an assignment posted to answer study questions about 3 points: Introduction to Poetry, Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, which starts, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and Sonnet 130, um, My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. I may extend the deadline for those just a bit because I think I've covered it pretty well for students whom I've seen on a fairly regular basis. But uh, for students who are uh, looking at the poetry and trying to figure it out, I want to see what you can come up with, but maybe the video will help. And if it does help, then I'll need to give you a little bit more time than just making it due on Thursday. Uh, your first assignment is to read the syllabus because that answers questions about the four major grades. There are two take-home tests. The take-home tests are similar in structure to the study questions that I gave you for A Midsummer Night's Dream last semester, but these will count as major grades. There will be a short paper with no secondary sources, and at the end of the semester, there will be a paper due that is a research paper, also short, but it has to use secondary sources, sources about literature, not just uh, literature. Because the focus that's frequently found in 1302 is introduction to literary genres: poetry, short fiction, drama. We're doing that. You can look at the course schedule, it's pretty detailed. The thing that's always done in 1302 is introduction to research methods and research papers. So plan on that, and that'll be due at the end of the semester. It won't take a lot of extra writing, but it will need to be in an MLA format, and we need to talk about which sources are okay to use. I am also aware, and I'm letting those of you know who haven't had a chance to talk to me directly about it. I know how well Chatbox GPT imitates writing. Um, I've seen some really remarkable examples. Don't try that on me because I can check very easily to find out whether you've used any AI to do your writing for you. And the consequences of doing that are the same as the consequences of paying somebody else to write a paper for you, or just finding something on the internet and turning it in as if it's yours. They're serious, and you don't want to have those consequences occur. How exactly I catch people who use AI to write papers? It's actually pretty simple. One, I have a lot of experience. Two, I ask the AI what the probability is that AI wrote the paper, and it will assign a probability. If the probability is very high, I will ask you questions about the paper you signed, the paper you said was yours. And if you don't know the answers to the questions that I asked, we got an issue. Um, so that bit is an addition that's kind of new to the longstanding school plagiarism policy, which was just to run things by Turnitin. I never have trusted Turnitin because I know that sometimes students pay people to write papers. And my strong recommendation is for you not to try to cheat, because if you get caught, the consequences are quite severe, and I think there's a really good chance you'll get caught. Um, so I'm begging you not to do that. So read the syllabus, look at the plagiarism section. The rules of discourse are the same as they were for the fall. I want online conversations to be civil. If we're meeting in person, I want those conversations to be civil as well. The course outline is much more detailed because there's no question about what we're doing. There's no debate about whether we're going to do a Midsummer Night's Dream. We are doing Othello. It's the last thing we're doing, and that is in arguing about literature. About half of the works that we're doing this semester, and almost all of the longer stuff, is in uh, arguing about literature. So if you look at the course schedule in the where it says what we're reading on a particular day, if you see a page number next to that, that's a page number on which the assignment starts if it's in arguing about literature. Othello's in arguing about literature. That's why I picked it. There are some other stories. We're doing poetry first, stories second, drama last. And the poetry, even the stuff that's in um, arguing about literature, I'm going to put online because it's all in the public domain. And that'll make it easier for some of you maybe to print it out and take notes directly on the poetry. I recommend that technique. I recommend note taking, period. But I absolutely recommend that you, for poetry, you have to do close reading. You have to look up words. You have to ask how lines affect other lines. And I'll give you some examples of that as I talk about the 3 poems that are already posted. We started last semester with the Billy Collins poem. I'm starting this semester with Introduction to Poetry. And I want you to tell me why you think I chose that as something to start with. If you look at the poem, you can see that whoever the speaker is, you don't assume that the speaker is Billy Collins. It could be a poet, it could be a teacher, it could be anybody who is asking people to look at a poem. But that still leaves a fair amount of room. So some of them hold it up to the light and they see color. Some of them listen to the sound of its hive. Some of them like to find their way out as if it's a puzzle. So there are different ways to kind of get into a poem. And note that no one is being privileged over the others. They're just different. Like you can see colors. Even if the poem is black text on white paper, you can see colors if your imagination sees blue, you see blue. So what you hear, what you see is a combination of what's in the poem and what's in your mind. It is synergistic, it's interactive. I think the next stanza, to move inside the room of the poem and feel around for a light bulb. So you can make your own epiphanies if you want. And then people can water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. That doesn't sound like a very deep dive, and it doesn't seem like the speaker of the poem's the least bit upset about it. If that's what works, that's what you should do, because those are just different ways of interacting with poetry, no one of which is privileged over the others. What seems privileged is privileged in a lot of classrooms, and it's what's discussed in the last 2 stanzas. All they want to do is tie the poem to a chair and torture at confession to find out, to get it to say what it really means. They beat it with a hose until it confesses what it really means. That's kind of like studying poetry as if the only purpose for doing it is to endlessly take EOCs. And I recognize that a lot of preparation for tests has to do with reading literature as if it has a unique solution set, like an algebra problem. But literature really doesn't have a unique solution set. If it did, we wouldn't be arguing about it. There are Shakespearean sonnets that were written 400 and 427, 28 years ago, that are there with the Billy Collins point. If we already figured those out, if we figured those out 400 years ago, we wouldn't still be arguing about them. And it's not just practice, so you get better at interpreting poetry until you really understand it. It's that people really don't know for sure what the poetry means. And they find new things to say. That I think is a distinguishing feature of literature. And it's something that I want you to be really careful about when you make claims about literature. You need always to use evidence. You need always to say how and why your claims are true. That's analysis. And you need to assume that your audience doesn't see it the same way you do. So you're arguing about literature. That's where your grade's going to come from. There's no secret answer that I have in my mind that I want you to find too. That's not how it works for me. I've seen teachers for whom it does work that way. I don't like that. I don't think that that has anything to do with literature that lasts. It's part of an ongoing argument, and people who claim to have it all figured out, I think are deliberately, or maybe not deliberately, missing maybe one of the most unique characteristics of literature. It does not lend itself well to oversimplification. If it did, it wouldn't last because lots of smart people have looked at Shakespeare and they still don't have one answer about what any of this stuff means. Lots of smart people have looked at everything we're going to read this semester. And while some arguments are better than others in terms of the quality of evidence and the quality of analysis, there's not a right answer. So if I asked you what the point is to Introduction to Poetry, I think you would be perfectly legitimate in saying the point is don't ask that question, because that's like tying a poem to a chair with the rope and beating it with a hose till it gives up its truth. There is no one point. It works differently for different people, and it's supposed to. And that means that you have to talk about why you see it your way, and other people will say, you know what, I got something completely different out of it. And then you say why. Because there isn't a right answer. Some people don't like that. Some people are driven crazy by that. Some two different valedictorians I happen to know. One I just did an interview with, and one was at the school where I taught 2 years ago. Told me the same thing. They don't like They didn't like literature because it doesn't have unique answers. It causes too much doubt. And in the interview, I didn't say anything much about that, except, I'm an English teacher, so I obviously get something out of stuff that doesn't always have one unique answer. The student who was the valedictorian at Odessa High School 2 years ago, I told her that she had brilliant things to say if she would own her ambivalence, and that's what she was not doing. She wasn't being intellectually honest with herself about the fact that she had doubt. Doubt's not a bad thing. Doubt's actually a sign that you're looking at, it can be a very powerful sign that you're looking at literature critically. With that in mind, I want to say just some brief things about the two Shakespearean sonnets. They're well known. You may have seen them before. Sonnet 18 seems to be a compliment in which the speaker, don't assume the speaker is Shakespeare, is trying to say, I would like to make a comparison between you, whoever you are, and the most ideal things in nature, but you're better than all of them. Summer's the nicest time of year in England. So it's mild, and ideal. You're better. Summer can be too hot. Summer can be too cold. It can be too cloudy. It can be too sunny. Um, you none of those things. Every fear from fair sometime declines. Uh, the poem says. Well, look up the word fair as a modifier, as an adjective. You will find, if you have a good dictionary, at least 6 different definitions of the word fair. And it's being used in 2 different senses in that line. That's an easy word that you might not think you need to look up, but think about it. Is it fair for me to give Fs to students who do a lot of hard work? No. Fair means what's the right thing to do. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? That's not the same as the first one I gave. That's beauty. Don't go out in the sun with your fair skin, you'll get burned. That's something else entirely. If a weather forecaster says it's going to be fair tomorrow, it means a mixture of clouds and sun, which is the same as temperate. And if your parents ask you how you're doing in school and you say fair, that's not the same as any of the ones that I used before. There are also definitions that are not even modifiers, but I'll leave those out for the moment. There are a lot of permutations that you get if you take all the definitions I went through and make them different from each other within that line, because one fair declines from the other. That means there are a lot of possibilities. It means there's a lot to unpack. And anyway, the poet, the speaker of the poem, seems to be promising the audience something that is even better than making a comparison to a summer's day. The speaker seems to be promising eternal life. When in eternal line's the time you grow. That's a heck of a promise. I'll make you live forever because I love you that much. But that's a nice compliment. In the line that says how the speaker wants to make the promise is also the line that says how he's going to fulfill the promise. It says eternal lines to time. You're looking at lines on the page. You're looking at lines of poetry. And if the speaker says, in this poem, you'll live forever, it's interesting. As so long as men can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. That's the couplet. That's the last 2 lines of a sonnet. Sonnets have 14 lines, 12 groups that are 3 groups of 4 lines each, and then the 2 lines at the end rhyme with each other, and often do an ironic commentary on what's come before. As long as people can basically do the things that they do as they fall in love, they look harder and harder, they breathe faster and faster. As long as people can do that, this poem lives, and this poem gives life to you. Well, that may explain why there aren't very many details about the person's appearance or personality in that poem. If there were details about the person's appearance or personality, it would stop future generations of readers from identifying with the poem through their own experience of love, because they'd be put off by the fact that the person they were in love with didn't match up with the person being described in the poem. So the person being described in the poem might say, this isn't really about me, and that would be a fair comment. But then the poem may not be a compliment to the person being described at all. It might be a compliment to whoever's making the lines of poetry, because in order for the promise to work, the lines have to last. And that's a comment about how good the poem is. Shakespeare didn't know he was Shakespeare, that he was going to be famous when he wrote that. But maybe he had an inkling. In any event, those are 2 different possible meanings. There are others. Um, Not all promises to make people live forever in poetry are actually designed to make people live forever in poetry. Sometimes they're designed to make for happy nights, like once, and forget about the future. Um, that's something the speaker could be up to in the poem. Those are just a few possibilities. You could come up with something really different. Um, go slowly, think about the questions, look up words that you don't know or that you think may have more meanings than you see, because that's doing analysis. And I really want you to get off on a good start and to do that. Sonnet 130 seems like anti Sonnet 18 because the comparisons are being made, but this time nature's perfect and the person is not. The word mistress does not have to mean somebody that you're seeing on the side. It can just mean girlfriend in Shakespeare's time. He says, my mistress is not, she doesn't have blazing eyes like the sun. Well, actually, nobody has blazing eyes like the sun except for that guy on X-Men. Um, they can like melt you with their eyes. That's not human. Um, and he goes on to give a lengthy list of characteristics that in nature are ideal. Red coral, well, your lips may not be that red. Your hair might not be long flowing tresses, it might be wiry and black. Um, your skin might be kind of pale and waxen. Your voice might not sound like music. Um, you may have bad breath. Goddesses float through the air, and the speaker says that his mistress does not float through the air like a goddess. So it seems like somebody's being insulted. Um, but then you got to consider the last two lines carefully. And yet, by heaven, my love is as rare as any she belied with false compare. So if you look at those lines, my love's as rare, my love's as rare as any she who is lied about with false compare. Well, how often do people go into a Hallmark store and buy a poem that says how unique somebody is before Valentine's Day? Is buying a Hallmark card really a way of showing somebody how unique they are? Because if it is, then there are like millions of people all over the world who are finding out they're unique for the same reasons on the same day. It seems kind of ironic, actually. And one thing I think the poem is doing is satirizing love language. Um, Nobody's perfect. And to tell somebody that they are perfect is maybe what people have to do if they don't really trust each other, if they can't be real with each other. In which case, the last two lines of the poem could be a compliment. You're rare because I don't have to lie to you about who you are. It could be a compliment. On the other hand, on the third hand, it could be an insult inside of a compliment, inside of an insult, because it says my love's as rare. The word as is important because as is like an equal sign. If he says my love's as rare as any she belied by false compare, how frequently are people flattered in love poetry? Is that like 1 in a million, or does it happen all the time? Because if it happens all the time, what he's actually saying is you're as rare as that. You're as rare as something that happens all the time. In which case, he's back to dissing. So there are a lot of complexities. And again, I'm just trying to shove you a little bit under the surface. You can go further if you want. And encouraging you to take risks, because I'm not going to say, well, that's not right. I will say you didn't defend this claim. You need to use evidence, or you need to say more about why this is true. That's different from saying this isn't right. That's not something you're going to, if you hear that from me, I'm messing up. So I want you to take your time, which which is something students do not usually do with literature, and treat it as something that has not one unique answer. It's not what I'm looking for, but a solution set that is very nearly infinite, so that people can have arguments about it that go on and on and on, conversations about it, civil conversations. So that's what I want you to start with, and the study questions should facilitate that. There are just a handful of study questions on introduction to poetry. And then the other study questions are beneath each sonnet. Sonnet 18 study questions are under Sonnet 18. Sonnet 130 study questions are under Sonnet 130. Those I want you to answer thoroughly enough to show me that you're thinking about what you're saying. And don't go on autopilot. Don't try to use chat box, because that's not really the purpose of the class. So I will do regular evening office hours, and we'll try to respond first to people who ask for help, but also just be available for people at a particular time. And we'll always be 6 to 7, 7:30 on Mondays through Wednesdays. And if you ask for a conference, I'll give you a conference. Sometimes I may decide to do a whole school. That didn't work very well last semester. I did set aside nights for whole schools and had one or no students in attendance. If you're complaining about a class and you won't show up when the instructor's doing office hours, stop complaining. Because not everything is someone else's fault. You can meet me halfway on this. I'm willing to help if you're willing to ask questions instead of grouching off that you don't understand and it's my fault that you don't understand. Consider first that the reason you don't understand is you just haven't spent enough time yet, and that it takes practice. Okay, I'm going to post this, and then if you have questions, you can get back to me.